It's always good to be the first speaker at one of these events, and I haven't had that honour before. But the good thing about it is you don't have to worry about somebody stealing your thunder or putting up a slide that you're going to talk about a bit later in the day and madly having to scramble in a break to rejig what you're going to say because you don't want to bore the audience. So I have the benefit, I guess, of being able to not worry about that. But I can assure, I suppose, the other speakers that looking at the topics and the fact that I don't intend to go into anything in lots of detail, I don't think anyone needs to worry about that today. So we're the happiest country, I hear. I probably would have agreed with that until the last few months as heading up HR in a coal mining company, because there's not a lot to be happy about at the moment. It's a really challenging environment, and I'd like to talk to you a bit today about the challenges being faced, not just by coal, of course, by mining in general, but do we have anyone else from the coal industry here? Okay, so I mean, you guys would understand how tough it is and how challenging it is, and some of the difficult decisions we've got to make in the coming months, I guess, in terms of skilling and talent retention and attraction in our organisations. So I'm going to sort of paint a bit of a picture for you today. I guess it's probably a good theme setter for the rest of the conference because it gives those who aren't in the mining industry in terms of in organisations, but maybe some of the suppliers and people servicing those organisations, some sort of insight into the challenges we face, even though I'm sure you have a pretty good understanding of that as it is. So when reading through my presentation again last night, I sort of had this horror moment of thinking, oh, this sounds really negative, and I hope I'm not going to be painting this really miserable picture. And I don't think I do, but I do want it to be realistic in terms of what I think are the challenges that we're facing at the moment in regards to talent. So I'll just click this on. Okay, so we're at a very critical point in time at the moment. Many of our businesses are facing headwinds that they haven't for a long period of time, especially in the mining sector. We've had quite a few years of very prosperous growth. The GFC ended up being pretty much a blip rather than a major impediment to our organisations, and we forged ahead. And we've seen the growth of mining in Australia sort of go from strength to strength in the last decade or so, and probably beyond that. But we're at a critical point in time because, like me as the head of HR for a coal mining organisation, we're being asked now to, in a very short space of time, start really thinking about what we have to do with our talent. Low commodity prices, and coal sort of is at the forefront of that. A high dollar, although it's good to see that that's sort of slipping down and sitting at around 96 cents when only probably in November or so it was $1.06 to the US. And other costs, particularly labour costs, have risen steadily over time. And that's put incredible pressure on our organisations in a very short space of time. When coal prices, for example, have reduced by about 30% or more in the space of a few months, and I'm sure the same is true for some of the other commodities as well. So our attention at the moment is really turning to survival rather than growth. Sorry, I'm getting croaky now. It gets very emotional when I talk about this stuff. So our attention is turning to survival, and we're having to focus more on the short term. But I guess that the reason I put that slide in is it's a real balancing act, because whilst we need to focus on the short term, because our businesses need us to really come up with some strategies to help us survive, and it is in some companies survival, and we've seen lots of companies not surviving so well. I'm lucky to be in one that it's a very old, well-established company, but boy, we're feeling the pressure as well. But it really is, when you think of it from the perspective of talent, it's a real balancing act, because the decisions we make today are going to affect the future. And one thing does seem true in sort of no matter who you listen to, is that we will come out of this at some stage. It may not be this year, it may not be next year, and prices may not go back to the dizzy heights we had, but we will come through this. And the companies that are good at making the right decisions now about how they address their talent needs are going to be the ones to take advantage of any upswing when it actually comes. So I am the optimist, and do believe that that will happen. So just, I guess, a bit of a recap on where we've been. So until recently, most of us in HR, at least, had healthy training and development budgets. Certainly, we had no issue in Peabody with getting the dollars we required to upskill our people, run a variety of programs, insource, outsource, a whole lot of really great initiatives to help develop our talent into the future. Our graduate budgets were very healthy, and we have a very robust graduate program. We have a number of apprentices across the business, as a lot of mining companies do. Sorry. And very healthy budgets for recruitment, agency spend, helping us to try and find the people as we all sort of, took part in this thing we call the war for talent. It's an interesting term, the war for talent, because a war obviously, when you think of a war, it has that concept of a winner and a loser. And I'm not really sure about who the winners are in the war for talent. I've seen a lot of very good Peabody people leave Peabody to go and join some of our main competitors. And I've seen a lot of very good people leave our main competitors to come and join Peabody. And every time that's happened in the past, salary discussions, pressure to offer someone higher salaries, buy out their bonuses, offer them FIFO, housing, retention bonuses to try and attract that person and get hold of that person. It's just gotten sort of to the point of absolute frustration when you put everything you can on the line and then someone sort of decides to not take your offer and they go with somebody else. And I guess some people might say that candidates are actually the winner. I'm going to have a drink of water. Where's my OD manager when you need him? Some people might say that the candidates are the people who win in the talent for war, but that's really not true, because it creates this expectation of them in terms of going from one company to the other, consistently raising their expectations about what that company can offer and the career progress that it can offer, and that has to come to an end somewhere. You're going to reach a ceiling, and we've experienced that in a number of our roles where young engineers they just have crazy expectations about where their career is going to head in a very short space of time, and what we can afford to pay them and how we're going to look after them. And we've, like everyone in this room who works for one of those companies, we do our best to really try and look after our people. But there comes a time where that challenge just starts to get really difficult to offer something ever improved on the last offer. So in the last 2 years, I myself have attended with my recruitment team international careers fairs in Canada, in South America, in South Africa, and in the US, trying to attract critical talent. And for us, some of those critical roles are mining engineers and geophysicists and geologists and that type of technical skill, which we've just found really difficult to source in Australia. And what we're finding with people like geologists, when they are around, they don't want to go and live at a remote site. They want to stay in Brisbane, which is where our head office is, and do day travel, but they don't want to live at site. So to try and find somebody willing to do that has become more and more difficult, as other companies are sort of also making work arrangements that allow them to do that. So it's a really tough situation, as I'm sure everybody knows. As I've mentioned, we've bought out bonuses. I've been absolutely shocked at some of the amounts that we've had to buy out for some senior engineers. Up to $500,000 and $600,000 worth of shares that are coming down the pipeline that they don't want to lose, and we want that person. And when you really think of how sustainable that is, it's just incredible. Our EA negotiations over the last few years have been very interesting. We had 5 agreements negotiated last year, and we're currently doing 4 this year. And last year, early in the year, it was all about 6%, 7% over 3 years. The unions, we deal mainly with the CFMEU. We're quoting. Everyone was able to quote some site that had a higher salary deal than the one we were on offer. And less than 12 months later, we're sitting across the table and we're talking about 0% increases in year one of a 3-year agreement. And trying to sell that and really try and get our employees to understand the critical situation we have at the moment is a really tough call. And I'd be happy to hear any ideas people in the audience have about how we can make that easier. We're trying to do our best to communicate with our employees and give them as much up-to-date market information so they can see this isn't just management rhetoric about trying to save costs. It's really about trying to save our business and keep that competitive in the current market. Because it's no secret that a lot of coal companies are not making any money out of some of their sites at the moment with the coal price. And so, like most companies, we're very focused on moving ourselves down that cost curve so that we can be competitive and profitable in this market so that when things do upswing, we can take advantage of that. But that's a really difficult message to sell people, that this year there's going to be little or no pay increases. And it's very hard when you've come off 2011 being the best year in our company's history, which is 130 years, to then be saying to people, we don't have, we're not offering you anything for the current 12-month. Very, very interesting. What we couldn't find in our own talent, we, of course, like a lot of companies, went down the track of filling that up with contractors. Hundreds of contractors, some of them charging $2,000 and $3,000 a day in some of our sites, because they know that we need that skill. And a lot of our own people left our organisation and decided to become contractors because they could earn much bigger money. And of course, there's a whole lot of issues associated with that, obviously. In regards to not only the cost, but just in terms of being able to influence that talent and have a core of your own people doing those things, and you're really at the mercy of those contractors. And I don't mean that in a nasty way if there's any contracting companies here, but a lot of individual contractors particularly just charging crazy money, and we were having to pay it. So I saw this, I can't remember where I saw this in a newspaper, but I actually thought it was a really good slide at the time, describing the Australian economy as a plane, where on one side you've got the manufacturing sector with a broken propeller and not sure if it's actually spinning or not, and on the other side a zooped up jet engine of the mining sector. I'm wondering now whether that engine would either be a lot smaller or showing some signs of, maybe some smoke coming out the back as we're starting to struggle a little bit. But I thought, it's interesting. And I guess the question is it still the case? Are we all painting a really dismal view of the industry? And is it just something that happens every now and again in commodity-type businesses? And are we all overreacting to this? And the reason I ask that question is because it obviously has a key influence with people choosing mining as a career. And I know I spoke to the University of Queensland when I first started at Peabody about 2 years ago. We were talking about the cohort that was going to be graduating in 2013. And they had something like 35 mining engineers graduating in 2013 because during the GFC, a lot of people were choosing not to go into mining engineering as a course and switching to different sorts of engineering degrees. And when you look at the GFC sort of really turned out to be, quite a non-event really for Australia. The current downturn is anything but a non-event, and I'm just concerned about the types of conversations that are occurring, whether it's with, parents of kids in grade 12 or school counsellors or whatever, saying to people, well, you really need to rethink whether you want to go into the mining sector. It's not doing so well at the moment. And as an industry, I'm not sure we do a very good job of starting to influence people with those career choices, and maybe we're not doing a very good job of selling the industry at a time where we are in a bit of a slump. And maybe I'm not helping talking this down like this, but I guess I'm in a room full of professionals. I'm sure I understand what I'm talking about here. Not sure if you can actually read those, but they're just some recent headlines, I guess, that reiterate the sort of information that people are now seeing in the newspapers of companies laying off people. Peabody itself, we had a reduction in force, we call it, in September last year, on the back end of companies like Xstrata and Rio and BHP in Brisbane, people moving their head offices or closing their Brisbane office, moving to their head office in Sydney, etc. And those things are not a positive message for people wanting to look at mining as a career, because we all know that in the past years everybody wanted to get into mining because they just paid crazy money, and there were stories in the newspaper. I had one of my colleagues in the US send me a clipping where a cook on an oil rig was saying they wanted to be paid $240,000 a year off the West Australian coast, and my US colleagues were saying, how do you guys survive out there paying those sort of salaries? I'm not sure that necessarily is true, but that's the sort of stuff that's out there. But what strikes me is the confusion in the media at the moment, because I get every morning I get the listing of media articles on the mining sector delivered to my desk from our communications team, and you open one article and it talks about how we've bottomed out and things are really are now going to be on the upswing, and then you open the next article and it's really terrible about prices are going to sort of continue to fall, companies are closing down, coal mining companies are stressed, and China's sort of basically closing its doors, and the next article says China's on the upswing, and it's really hard to know exactly what we're reacting to, and the only thing we can react to, I guess, is our price, because like everybody, that's the reality. No matter what appears in the media, that's what the bottom line is, what drives us. But I guess I am concerned about the messages that are out there. You get onto any news site and there'll be some article about mining or whatever, and the boom is over, and that's a really dismal message for people who are looking to join our ranks. Like most companies, our first focus was on contractors. We removed last year a few hundred contractors from our business. A number of them crept back in again over the last sort of few months, and we're now re-looking at those again. We're really taking a close look at FIFO, and I know there's a whole big issue about FIFO in terms of the social impacts and the cancer of the bush, I think one article has referred to it as. We are really looking at the viability of FIFO in the longer term, and I guess from our company's perspective, we're a little luckier than most in that we don't have highly remote sites. So fully understand that some of the larger mining companies who have West Australia sites, there's really no option but FIFO. But most of Peabody's sites up in the Bowen Basin are still within, you've got Moranbah and you've got Nebo as smaller towns that people could live and work in. But every day I get several requests for new roles requesting approval for FIFO because the person does not want to disrupt their family life and travel, and I understand that. But the problem is it's just adding huge cost to the organisation at a time where we just can't afford it. And there's been all sorts of discussions about hiring charter planes and buying our own plane and that sort of thing, but it is an issue, I think, for a lot of us that something's going to have to happen eventually in regards to that whole issue of FIFO. And it's a debate I'm going to be very interested in watching, and hope to get some ideas in the next sort of 2 days from people here about how their organisations might be managing that. But at a time of cost reduction, it's incredibly expensive to run FIFO operations. But what do you do if you don't have that choice? Mentioned contractors. Interestingly enough, we've really seen a decrease in our staff turnover in the last 12 months. So we've gone from, in our salaried group, and this is from May last year to April this year, we've reduced in our salary ranks, it's dropped from 19% to 12%, and in our workforce from 11% to 5.5%. And that's a really good thing, but what it means is, if that's occurring across most businesses, it means that for those critical skills, people are tending to stay where they are, and so there's still that shortage of some of those critical skills. And when you're talking, deputies, statutory roles that you have to make a mine operable, if you can't get them, obviously you're in really deep trouble. So the reduction in turnover is good from a retention perspective, but not so good when you're looking at the general market and a shortage that exists. So it's a really interesting phenomenon. So on one hand, we're saying we want to keep our people, but everybody's doing that, and people are obviously sort of a bit gun-shy about moving organisations. And for those critical roles, it makes it really tough for us to fill them. So it's a real conundrum. I've mentioned how the new generation is making their skilling decisions now. So what are we doing as a business or as an industry to really work hard to make sure that mining remains that jewel in the crown that it always has in terms of mining careers and earning good money and getting lots of people interested in doing mining degrees, which has always been a struggle anyway. And I have a slide sort of later on that shows the gap there through to 2015. In terms of just the gap that's created by not graduating enough mining engineers. And whilst projects might be being delayed and companies are winding down, those projects will happen eventually, most of them anyway, so those skills are going to be needed. Yesterday I had actually delivered to my desk a bit of a pulse survey that 9 coal sector companies took part in, and there was ourselves, Rio Tinto, Xstrata, BHP Billiton, and a few others, and it just was a bit of a pulse survey on what was going on in the HR side of the business, and a few things came out of that I thought were very interesting. There's been a 27% decrease in the number of people employed in the coal industry in 1 year. That's an amazing number of people that are no longer in our industry. 71% of the respondents, remembering there was still only 9, but have already experienced a cut in the HR budget and forecast future HR budget cuts. And the cuts mainly focus on the use of external providers and training and development spend. It's the old story of as soon as things get tough, you start cutting how much you're spending on training, how much you're spending on recruitment agencies, how much your in-house programs are costing, and I'd be lying if I said we weren't in exactly that same situation. But it's a very concerning thing when you have to continue to spend money to keep the organisation skilled, but you're getting increasing pressure to say you've got to cut your budgets because we just can't afford to run at the moment like that. So it is depressing. I'm making it sound really horrible. So I guess this slide is really asking the question: are skill shortages here to stay? So we're still going to be competing internationally for skilled migrants. That's always going to happen because Australia's a small country. We've got our baby boomers already starting to retire now. I'm a baby boomer, but I'm on the tail end, so I've still got a few years yet. But there's going to be a huge number of people exiting the workforce in the next 10 to 15 years. And that's going to really leave us short of some very critical talent. And so the skill shortage is not going anywhere. It might be less tough at the moment, or we might, because we're all downsizing, it's not such an issue, but it's there in the background. It's going to come back and raise its ugly head at some point or another. So we really need industry and government to address the issues about the types of skills that our industry needs into the future. And there's been some really good things being done, but when you compare it to some of the other industries, there's a lot of room to go. I don't see a lot happening in terms of mining subjects, for example, in schools. And I was lucky enough to work for Boeing when we developed the aerospace curriculum for grade 11 and 12 in Queensland as an actual OP or university entrance subject. And I'm just wondering why we don't, as an industry, have that type of industry focus that some of those other sectors do. And I know there's a lot of different programs with schools as individual schools, but the educational system hasn't really come to terms with some of the needs to start getting those young people's minds really switched on to mining and the exciting career opportunities that they could be looking at into the future. There's obviously a need for us to identify the barriers. There's what happens within our companies, the industry as a whole, the country, and then the availability of physical and social infrastructure goes back to that whole FIFO thing. How are we going to meet the need of people in those areas when they don't want to live there? People do not generally want to live in rural areas, and that's where, if you're a miner, that's where your focus is. So some of the challenges I guess we're facing is, how do we attract to an industry that's currently in a slump? And we are in a slump, there's no doubt about that. And I mentioned before how frustrating it is to read those articles about how mining is sort of coming off the boil. But how are we going to continue to attract people who haven't traditionally worked in mining or have left the industry because they've been concerned about the future viability of their career and gone into to other industries, maybe oil and gas, which has seemingly better prospects at the moment? How do we maximise the investment in apprentices and graduates, cadetships, etc.? Like most companies, we have a fairly traditional graduate program, and I'm sort of out there at the moment looking at what can we do to make that graduate program more exciting, more interesting. We had a graduate last week, a mining engineer, who resigned because he didn't like the fact that he was not yet called an engineer. He was called a graduate engineer. So he's a second-year graduate. And that was his reason for leaving, that he thought he was ready to be a fully fledged engineer and was going to go somewhere where that's what they called him. And that's the sort of stuff we're up against. And that's a mining engineer that we've invested a huge amount of dollars into. And, to lose people like that, makes me wonder what's our graduate program doing to make someone, think that. It's obviously something where, we need to improve on, but that's a good example. Leveraging social media and technology, an obvious thing that regardless of whether you're in mining or whatever, is an important thing because that's where all the young people are. That's where it is if you're probably Gen Y or beyond. But it's interesting, Gen Y, as I looked up last night, are now already starting to turn 30. I remember when Gen Ys were just sort of leaving school, and so I'm not sure what we call after Gen Y. I've heard Nexters and that sort of stuff, but those people are certainly technologically savvy, and as an industry we need to be much better about how we use that to be clever and attract people. How do we attract female miners? And I mean miners in a generic sense. I don't mean actual mine workers necessarily, but we did our EEO report last week, and I shuddered at the figures that we had to present and that we have to publish in our business about the number of women who are in our organisation, particularly at the technical and senior levels. And there's such a huge talent pool that's just not being utilised by us. I'm not putting everyone into that bucket, but that's a challenge for us, and there's an opportunity there as well. And then, of course, training and work readiness programs for Indigenous people. We don't have a good record of that in Peabody. It's something that we have had so many starts at trying to address, and we just don't seem to be able to get it right. And so that's something, again, that's one of the challenges that we have to look at, because, again, a really large untapped talent base, sure, has its own challenges, and there's a lot of skilling issues associated with that, but something that we really have to get our heads around. But what is sure is that we're in an era of, again, more continuous change, and you can have attended conferences like this over the last 20 years, and someone mentions, we've got to be more flexible, and we've got to be more agile, and we've got to be, continuously improving, and I guess it just shows that that's real. And as for me and my HR team, we're really, really struggling at the moment with that whole reinventing the way we do things, and it is tough to continually come up with new ways of doing things to meet the needs of your organisation. But I guess that's what the satisfying part of my job is. But it's not easy, and I certainly don't stand here pretending that we've got it right. I'm really looking for ideas as to how we might get some of these challenges overcome. The other thing we obviously have to look at as businesses is what our value proposition is, and I've spoken a bit about that. But salary is important, but we just can't keep throwing money at the problem, which is really what all of us have been doing. And people just go round and round the treadmill earning more every time, and then of course you're in the situation we're in now, where suddenly we're having to cut back the expectations. And I'm saying constantly no to salary requests from sites as they say, we've got this new mining engineer, we want to pay him X dollars, and we're saying, you know what, we can't do that anymore. We've got to start rolling this back a bit. Innovative benefit packages are pretty tough, aren't they? Because you've got all that tax regime that with FBT coming in 2000 really took away our ability to be flexible, but we've got to continue to look for ways to make our value proposition exciting and interesting. Career, job security and work-life balance are important drivers for the next generation, whether it's Gen Y or beyond. Those things, as I interview young people, are as important as ever in terms of those new generations. So gone are the expectations of wanting to work, 10 hours days and living in the bush. They want to have flexible arrangements. And my business particularly struggles terribly with that whole idea of workplace flexibility. And you raise it with some of our other senior executives, and their first response is, no, we can't possibly do that. Well, yes, we can, and we have to start doing that because we're just not going to be able to compete. And there's a whole culture there of, when I was young, I worked hard, I worked 12-hour days, and so that's what people should be doing now. And that has to change. The other thing that has to change is our internal cultures about the idea of skilling, where, again, we have a fairly traditional model of, moving up a career path, getting the training from certain aspects and whatever, but we've got to look at fast-tracking people and making it easier for them to get the skills we need sooner. And we struggle in terms of Peabody. We have the typical conversation with our general managers at site when we are ready to bring our graduates out of the graduate program. And they love having the graduates on site because HR pays for them. But as soon as you start saying, right, we've got this, this guy now, he's been with us for 2 years, he's a mining engineer, you've got a mining engineer vacancy, and what do you think the first thing I hear is? Yeah, but he hasn't got quite enough experience. So we want to find someone outside who's got more experience. And we've just invested all this money in somebody internally. So, there's this whole culture about, they haven't done their time yet. They're only 25, so how could they possibly be ready to go into this, this mining engineer job? Succession planning and talent management, obviously, critical things to be managing. And again, succession planning is tough in any environment where there's a skill shortage because people are not necessarily staying for the long run, but you've got to have people job ready and start having the conversations about how do you get people ready for the next level. And if you're failing to do that, obviously, you're not meeting the needs of your organisation. I think this is my last slide, so hopefully I'm not over time, but this was just a slide Mineral Council of Australia I came across, just showing, and it was obviously produced not too long ago, but just showing the gap, and you may not be able to read it, but showing the gap there for engineers and geoscientists through from, I guess, 2011 to 15, so it must have been produced a year or two ago, just explaining what the gap is going to be. Now, as I said, that's before we've had the current downturn, but most of the projects are still going to go ahead at some stage, and our universities are not producing enough of those, enough talent in those areas to meet our immediate needs. You can see the yellow bars, which are the temporary skilled migration. We've got to do something about that because otherwise I'm going to have to continue to go on trips overseas to try and attract workers from South Africa and South America. And we've had some very good talent from those areas, but it's expensive, it's horrendously expensive, it's difficult. 457 visas are going to be cut back on, and so there has to be a way of growing that talent more internally and looking at programs like associate degrees for engineers, so it allows them to perform a whole lot of the duties at site without having to have a full engineering degree. And there's some good work going on in areas like that. It wasn't my last slide, this is. So next generation miner, they're out there now ready to come into our industry. We need to do something about that. Second dot point there, I've got the 70-20-10. We have introduced that concept in Peabody about 70% of your learning should happen on the job, 20% is through coaching and mentoring, and only 10% should be through formal development of some sort, because it's that 10% that we've been spending traditionally lots of money on. The 70% is actually a lot more affordable. If you can really design jobs and design opportunities that give your up-and-coming talent an opportunity to really increase their skills, learn from the best, then you're obviously in a much better position. I've talked about graduate and apprenticeship programs, more collaboration between the education sector, and industry. And I think industry or businesses themselves need to start, taking a different view of this talent war. The pie is only so big, and rather than arguing about who gets the biggest slice, we should be all working together to try and increase the size of the pie so we all share this whole thing of talent just moving around from Peabody to BHP to Xstrata to Rio and then back to Peabody again. It's not sustainable, and something has to change. So I think I'm going to end there because I'm sure I'm out of time.